It's one of the most famous historic sites in England, Hadrian's Wall. Over 80 miles of wall, turrets and forts, stretching from coast to coast across northern England. Mile after mile of stone marching over the horizon, an icon of Roman dominance. And now, it's celebrating its birthday. In 122 AD, the Emperor Hadrian visited Britain, and as a Roman historian tells us, he put many things right, and he was the first to build a wall from sea to sea to separate the Romans from the barbarians. But Hadrian's Wall is also an enigma. To understand this familiar but surprising structure, I'm going to explore 3 key sites along its length. Arbea on Tyneside in the east, Chester's in the heart of Northumbria, and Birdoswald in Cumbria as the wall approaches the west. I'll dig into some of the main questions about this 1,900-year-old structure. Why was the wall built? Barbarian land. Who were the people who lived here?
For women.
This is aggressive defence.
What happened when Roman rule in Britain came to an end? Did this wall come tumbling down? And don't worry, I'll also be seeking out the influence of Hadrian's Wall in modern times, from the Eagle of the Ninth to Game of Thrones. When the Emperor Hadrian came to his province of Britannia in AD 122, there was a profound change happening to the empire. Up until then, in the 150 years since Augustus, the first emperor, the Roman Empire had no real borders. It had just grown and grown, with no apparent limit. But now the empire was increasingly coming up against obstacles. Powerful rival empires in the east, resurgent Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine, and tough, warlike people in what is now Scotland. They had to ask themselves the question, did they want to go on expanding indefinitely? And the answer for Emperor Hadrian was no. He wanted to consolidate, dig in, fortify a line around that empire. And that is why this is the northern edge of an empire in its prime. One that stretched from here across thousands of miles of Roman-controlled land and sea to the sands of the North African desert. I'm starting my investigation of Rome's northern wall at Birdoswald, a well-preserved fort built 1,900 years ago in Cumbria. Joining me by one of the main entrances is Rob Collins from Newcastle University.
Originally.
So this is obviously one of the big gates here.
Yeah, this is the east gate at Birdoswald, and one of the best gates along the entire wall, really.
It's huge, isn't it? It's a double. I thought these were meant to be defensive positions. These massive big gates.
Yeah, this is a gate, but it's also a monument. You have to imagine this thing standing 2 or 3 stories tall. And you can see the quality of building in these gates. So those stones there that make the pier for the arch are very nicely shaped. You've got this little Springer stone, and actually the first voussoir, the first bent stone which would form the arch over the whole gate.
Is this the idea? You're kind of entering or leaving the Roman Empire and they want you to know about it?
Well, in some cases, but actually it's not just the empire, it's a fort. You know, this is a large settlement full of 500 soldiers. You know you're coming into military space when you walk through a gate like this.
So we've got 500 men here, and this is one of how many castles on the wall?
There are 17 to 20 forts along the wall, those fortified garrisons. Yeah, a castle in a medieval sense.
Birdoswald follows the classic fort design of Hadrian's Wall. It has curved corners, giving it a playing card shape. There's large gateways on the east, west and south sides, and its northern edge runs along the line of the wall. There would have been a fortified gate here, giving access to the lands beyond the wall. According to Roman sources, there was unrest in northern Britannia in the early 2nd century AD. It's possible that the wall was built, in part, demarcate hostile tribal groups from those who were allied to Rome, like the Brigantes, who appear to have been the largest group in that region of Britain.
With Hadrian's Wall, you get something new. You're getting monumentality, and in stone. So all of a sudden, local people are encountering very large, very solid fortifications. And if that isn't the worst bit, they've then got this massive entire wall that's cut the island in half. They can no longer just simply move their flocks from field to field if they're living locally. It's presenting a whole new way of life.
How many men would have manned this as a defensive belt right across this part of England? How many would there have been?
It's tough to be certain about numbers at any given time. Strength reports can sometimes lie, but you're looking at really a minimum of 12,000 men.
It's a big deal.
It's an army in and of itself, just based on this line on the wall.
Yeah, that's one army in one small corner of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about those 500 men who would have been here?
Well, what's great about this fort and most of Hadrian's Wall, in fact, is we have hundreds of inscriptions that often name the units that are in occupation. And here at Birdoswald, the most famous unit, the one that was here the longest, is a unit of Dacians. So Dacia is part of the Roman Empire, which is now modern-day Romania.
Wow.
So the Romans were really good about redistributing the manpower, I think we could say, of potentially, the most dangerous element of a population, those young men who have lots of energy and spirit and maybe not so much sense, putting them in the Roman army, shifting them to a different part of the Roman Empire where they can do the job of the empire and not endanger the empire.
Hadrian's Wall didn't begin as a huge stone structure. Initially, in this part of the wall, it actually began as a turf wall. You can see the remains of it here, a big mound of turf and soil. And it was only perhaps when Hadrian came to visit himself that the plan changed. The turf wall was turfed out and a massive stone wall was built just over there, 50 meters to the north. The legionaries who built the wall often left marks that didn't have an obvious military purpose. Rob, why is there a huge penis on the wall?
Well, it's a fantastic bit of what some people would call graffiti, but I think it might be better to see this as a magic symbol, as a symbol of protection. The Romans actually put these things all over their empire. So anywhere you travel in the Roman Empire, I would challenge you, you should probably see a phallic symbol someplace where the Romans were building.
But this is not just graffiti carved out of the wall. This is a relief. This is a stonemason has been to work on this.
Yeah, this has taken a bit of time for probably a legionary soldier to carve out of the stone. And actually, if you think of it then as a protective symbol, because that's what a phallus is often meant to do. It's meant to protect a wearer if you have it as an amulet. If it's carved on your house, it's supposed to protect your home. Here we have it carved into the wall. They're putting some magic protection into the wall. And it kind of changes things a little bit when you think it's not just a massive physical barrier, but actually maybe they're trying to imbue it with a bit of magic too.
Speaking of massive physical barrier, it's now, 2 meters tall here. How high do we think it would have been?
We think it's about 4 meters tall at its full height.
So it's double this?
Yeah, double this. So you have to really consider this as a barrier. And it's not just a wall. So anyone trying to cross the wall, they've got to go across a massive ditch. They then have to climb the wall. They then have to get a little bit further afield, and then they've got to go over a mound, down a ditch, and up another mound called the vallum. And so there's 3 major obstacles there for crossing the wall if you're not welcome.
You think of Roman legions not fearing anybody or anything, and yet to invest that much time and effort in creating this huge defensive belt, something they didn't like up here.
Yeah, it's a massive investment of manpower to build this thing, and not just for 1 or 2 miles. It's 80 Roman miles long, a bit more than 72 modern statute miles. So it's not a quick decision or a cheap build.
The area around Birdoswald is the best place to see a continuous section of Hadrian's Wall, as the Romans planned it around 122 AD, with its large forts and smaller mile castles. Rob and I are heading a couple of Roman miles along the wall to Mile Castle 48, positioned above the steep-sided Poltros burn. A railway embankment built by the Victorians now follows the line of the wall. Coming in now through the south gate, heading north through the wall. Is it me or is this fort built on the skew a little bit?
It is a little bit wonky. And it was for the Romans too. You can look at the stones there on both outside walls.
Yeah.
And you can see they're at an angle. So the Romans built to the slope.
Right, so it hasn't just subsided.
There's no subsidence. This is exactly how the Romans built it.
Why would they have built on a forward-facing slope like this and on the higher ground up there?
So it looks a bit odd now. We've got a train line in front of us, the woods blocking the view. But actually, if you think about where we are, we're right beside this really narrow defile, this burn, the porous burn. And actually, it's positioned very well to watch people going up and down that burn in terms of people who might sneak in, people who might sneak out. So while it looks silly to a modern viewer, if you think in terms of how people moved in antiquity, people who might not want to be caught, actually, this is a really good position.
And out there, where the railway embankment is now built on Hadrian's Wall, through those trees, that is the barbarians.
That is Barbaricum, the land of the barbarians, where the empire ends and barbarianism begins.
And what signifies a barbarian? Is it their culinary taste, the way they dress?
That comes into it, but it's actually quite simple. For the Romans, a barbarian is anyone who isn't Roman. But it's not so much an ethnic or racial attitude because they're not banned from the Roman Empire. The Romans are actually surprisingly inclusive in the ancient world. So as a barbarian, you can become a Roman citizen.
And if you're a barbarian farmer, could you bring your flocks through here?
That's what we don't know. What we really need is some evidence showing that. But this wall makes it very hard to move your flock of sheep back and forth if you need to.
And speaking of wall, what's this extra bit of wall here? Is this a later addition? Why have they walled up some of this gateway to the north?
Yeah, so this big fantastic gateway gets narrowed to a simple postern, just one person portal.
Just here, yeah.
And that becomes a control point, really.
Is that because they're scared about sort of giant forces crashing through here?
It could be, but if you also consider that by blocking this gate, making it so just a single person could come through, you're really reducing the usefulness of this gate. That forces anyone with wagons of goods, large herds of cattle, flocks of sheep, to go to those forts and go through the gates at the forts, where there's lots of soldiers. How
did people come and go? Is there a system of passes or passports, paperwork?
We know from other frontiers, Egypt especially, where they have straka, bits of pottery with messages painted on them, that this would act as a pass. So there is a paperwork, a pass that an officer would sign that would allow you access in and out of the Roman Empire.
Just like modern borders, there could have been quite the administration up here.
Absolutely. And also potentially, a bit of corruption as well. Because actually, there's no major general that's sitting here. So this might be a lucrative position for a very lowly soldier if they want to make a little bit of extra cash.
Life for those soldiers manning the lonely mile castles must have sometimes felt quite remote from the protection of the larger garrisons. This reconstruction of Mile Castle 48 shows how tightly packed and hunkered down these little forts were. So even though this is a solid feeling structure, it's still quite small, and I can imagine on certain nights here or misty days it feel quite isolated. But are there accounts of people from the north coming and attacking the garrisons here, slaughtering them, raids, full invasions?
We don't have many historical accounts of battle. We have a nice account from Cassius Dio when the Caledones crossed the wall. And so we know there's the odd invasion, but this could be something which is a daily occurrence, a small skirmish as a Roman patrol party and raiders meet, or it might be something that's very rare. And of course that can change over time.
Remember the East Gate at Birdoswald? Well, this is how it would have looked in its prime. I've headed east to the remarkable reconstruction of a gateway on the wall, built by the mouth of the River Tyne at South Shields. This is a huge Roman base at Arbea. It gives a clear image of just how imposing Rome's frontier was. But I've come here to see something rather less monumental. Tucked away in Arbea's museum are two remarkable tombstones that reveal deeply personal stories about the people who travelled from across the empire to live and work around Hadrian's Wall. To help me decode the details is curator Alex Croom, starting with a monument put up by a grieving husband.
This one is the tombstone of Regina. So it says, to the spirits of the departed, Regina, freedwoman and wife of Barates from Palmyra in Syria. And she was of the nation of the Cavalry, who come from southeast England, and she lived 30 years. But what's particularly interesting about this tombstone is that it's actually a bilingual one. This is the only one known from Roman Britain. And the line underneath in Palmaran Aramaic says, "Freedwoman of Barate, alas." But it's quite interesting that the Aramaic inscription just refers to her as his freedwoman and not as his wife.
Was she like to have been enslaved and sort of freed by her husband, do you think? Or
He probably bought her as a slave, but that at some stage decided to free her and then marry her.
Amazing amount of detail here. What can we tell about her life and her status?
Well, she's sitting in a high-backed wicker chair, which is a very characteristic type of furniture for women in particular. She's got her jewellery on, nice bracelets, but she's opening a box there. You can see the sort of the keyhole for lockbox, so this is showing that she's got money. And then on the other side is a basket of wool, and in her hand she's got the distaff and the spindle. So this is a very female occupation, is spinning thread. So this is showing her that she's a very womanly, wifely person, though probably as an ex-slave she's getting her slaves to do that, and she's no longer having to do it herself.
She's overseeing it.
Exactly.
And there's a second tombstone, one that captures the relationship between two members of the army.
This is a really fine sandstone, so it takes a lot of detail, and you can see the influence of Syrian tombstones in it from the amount of folds in the cloth and all the creases in the mattress cover. But this one again, this one is a tombstone to someone called Victor, who was the nation of the Moors from North Africa, Mauritania, and he lived 20 years. He was a freedman from a man called Numerianus, who was a soldier, just a cavalry soldier from the first Ala of Asturians. Ala just means it's a cavalry regiment, Asturians as a tribe from Spain. And Numerianus devotedly conducted Victor to his tomb, showing that they must have had a very close relationship.
So amazing. His former slave, they're obviously so close, he erects this beautiful memorial to him when he's dead.
Yes, Numerianus is not an officer, he's just a rank-and-file soldier, and yet he puts all his money into creating a tombstone like that.
So we've got a former slave from southern England, we've got a Syrian, effectively, from what we call the Middle East now, Spanish and North African. What a collection of people would have been here.
Yes, and that's just 2 tombstones.
It's remarkable being able to decipher the stories of these people, whose very different lives brought them to Hadrian's Wall. Stone is so much more durable than human flesh and bones. So whenever I'm at Hadrian's Wall, I can get distracted by the sheer amount of stone, the military engineering. But I don't think enough about the men who manned those walls, who were barracked in those forts. But thankfully, occasionally we do find other bits of stone that do give us an insight into the men and women that were here. This remote outpost of empire, from thousands of miles apart, brought together by their language, their beliefs, their fashions, their tastes, but also their obligations to that empire and the advantages they derive from it. From the fascinating human stories revealed at Arbea, I'm moving west to the central section of the wall, an unusual fortress, Chester's. Like all the major forts, it was added to the basic design of the wall a couple of years after construction began, possibly on the orders of Emperor Hadrian. But Chester's was specifically designed for fast-moving shock troops. Dr. Simon Elliot is helping me interpret its layout. So who are the men that are living in these buildings?
Well, you're in the middle of a Roman barrack block for cavalrymen. So actually these are barrack rooms and stables at the same time. So what the Romans did, because it was convenient and practical, was that the cavalrymen would have stayed in barrack blocks like this. Each is a barrack room. Each barrack room would have had 3 men, and interestingly, the horses in there as well.
I think you'd probably quite like to live so close to your horses. On a cold winter's day, you get the heat from them.
Absolutely, yeah. So the horses on the bottom, 3 horses in here, then a mezzanine level above, sort of with a wooden floor, and that's where the men slept. If you imagine that you're based here, but you sort of originate in the blazing heat of Roman North Africa, and you find yourself here in the freezing cold of a British winter, in the wild west of the Roman Empire, you're going to love having those natural radiators below you.
Are they doing big cavalry sweeps? Are they riding out, raiding, scouting?
That's exactly right. So basically this is aggressive defence. One of the really, really interesting things about this Fort Chester's is 3 of the 4 gateways are actually proud north of the wall. So this is where the aggressive defence comes from, where the flying cavalry columns sort of shoot off into the far north to take on the natives who are rebelling occasionally against the Roman presence in the north of Britain.
So Hadrian's Wall seems to have different purposes, and many historians disagree exactly what it's for, but this suggests this is about projecting hard power.
If you think about this 80-mile long physical barrier with its 158 turrets along it, with its 80-mile castles, with its 17 forts, that is a massive investment in time and money. So to me, this has got to be a hard military barrier. But military barriers aren't just about standing sort of on top of the wall, stopping people coming through. You have to have an aggressive defence to stop people even getting the chance to come to the wall in the first place.
As I said in the First World War, our front line is the enemy's wire.
Absolutely right, yeah. And this is a prime example of that from the Roman world.
Kind of trying to dominate no man's land beyond.
Probably all the way up through the Scottish borders up to the sort of Forth.
It's remarkable how many expensive resources the Roman Empire poured into its northern frontier. Nearly 500 cavalrymen and their horses were stationed in this fort alone. It's an indication of the vast commitment to this defensive project in terms of men, animals, and infrastructure. And a key part of that infrastructure was the management of this vast enterprise. Administration was one of Rome's greatest exports, and it created unified, predictable processes right across the empire. So this looks different to the barracks area.
This is called the Principia, so it's the headquarters building for the Roman fort, and you have a Principia in every single Roman fort everywhere in the Roman Empire.
So if you're a new officer arriving, you're a bit wet behind the ears, it doesn't matter, you can get straight into it.
Absolutely, yeah, you know exactly what you're going to go. You'll know exactly which office you're going to go into. You'll know exactly within the office where all the materials are to do your work sort of are, because you've done it exactly the same everywhere else in the Roman Empire you've been.
And this is the beating heart of the camp.
It is, it's actually physically right in the middle of the camp. But one of the rooms here is my favourite room. So let me show you my favourite room. It's right over here. This is called the Chapel of the Standards.
Ooh, this is where the units standard are, or we got like a flag today.
Absolutely, yeah. This is the holiest of holies for this particular military unit, because right in front of you here, you'd have arrayed the standards, which would only come out to be used when they're actually on campaign. But also, even more importantly, you'd have a bust of the emperor. So this is where the commander of the unit would come and say a small prayer to the emperor to give them some good luck before they went fighting the Britons of the far north. But within this space, the holiest of holies, there's an even holier place, and that's behind us here.
Oh, right. That's the strong room.
That's the strong room, absolutely right, yeah. This is the vault in the Chapel of the Standards where the pay chest is kept for the military unit.
So you've got the standards, the symbols of Roman Empire, and then you've also got the cash. The 2 twin pillars of Roman power.
Absolutely right, yeah. I mean, basically, without that, there'd be no soldiers here. But occasionally, you need even more luck. So let me go and show you something just as important as this. And it's got a colloquial name as well. It's called the Chester's Chap.
Oh, it's another penis.
So this is a good luck symbol, the ultimate good luck symbol for the Roman military unit who are based here.
Well, wherever you find dicks, you find Romans. And that's sitting proud, if you don't mind me saying, on the pavement here, isn't it? It's not hidden away.
Dan, that is the largest phallus in Roman Britain.
Crikey. Despite the macho good luck symbols, legionaries liked their luxuries too. Life on the wall could certainly be extremely tough, but the Roman army did provide the chance to relax and bond with your comrades. What a beautiful setting this is.
Well, Dan, you're walking into a Roman bathhouse.
Is that what this is?
This is a bathhouse. This is one of the best Roman bathhouses actually in the whole of Roman Britain. It's absolutely amazing. Look at the view as well with the River Tyne.
That's gorgeous, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is this a luxury, or is this actually quite essential to survival up here in this climate?
For the Roman soldiers, culturally, it's absolutely essential. Okay. So this tells them that they're still part of the Roman Empire. You could come from North Africa, you could come from Syria, you could come from the Balkans, from Italy, from Spain. So wherever you go, here as an example, you want to have all the accoutrements of being part of the Roman Empire, and one of the big cultural things about being Roman is bathing and having a bathhouse. So culturally, for the soldiers, it's vital.
It's like the Americans can get Pizza Hut on any military base they're at anywhere in the world.
Absolutely right, absolutely right.
And is it on a slope deliberately so that everything goes downhill?
Everything flows downhill, including at the toilets. Let me go and show you the toilets.
Right at the bottom of the hill.
Right at the bottom. And here it is. This is a Roman toilet. So you come to the Roman bathhouse, you're the soldier, and the first thing you want to do, you want to ablute.
Yep.
So you will sit right here, this is where the wooden bench was, and then everything goes into the drain below and it gets washed away into the River Tyne.
Straight off to the Tyne.
Very practical Roman engineering.
And it's a communal experience, you're just sitting side by side?
Yep, so
Chatting?
Chat, having a chat about what they're going to be doing later in the day. They're going to sort of ride out on the north of the frontier, sort of terrorise the local natives, etc. And then effectively do the equivalent for the Romans of reading a newspaper on the loo. And then you carry on your bathing experience.
If there's one question I get asked more than any other, it's how did the Romans wipe their backsides?
Well, the real answer is we don't know, but most people think they use poo sticks, so a stick with a sponge on the end. But some experts think they used other things as well. So they may have used, for example, and think about this, think about the practicalities, pine cones. So think about that, a pine cone. And we certainly know that people in the ancient world used their left hand.
Right, well, having used their left hand, they're going to want to have a good bath, aren't they?
So let's go and have a good bath. So we've been to the toilet and we're now walking out of the changing room. So the first thing you do in terms of a Roman bathing experience is you go into the tepidarium, the medium heat room. So this room opens the pores. This is the caldarium. This is the hot room, so your pores are now really open. You sweat everything out. You're in the far north of Britain. You're warmed up, you've got hot, and now you're going to jump into a freezing cold pool here to close your pores. That is going to wake you up. The Roman bathing experience is sort of like really builds for a military unit camaraderie, because everybody's experiencing it in the same way. You'd have the officers here at the same time as the troopers. So in here, everybody's an equal.
And Chester's, like Arbea, has evidence written in stone showing exactly who was stationed in this exposed northern outpost. It's a real contrast coming in here and looking at all the carvings and the reliefs compared to the plain stonework outside.
Well, this tells us a huge amount about the people who were manning Hadrian's Wall and all the forts, and crucially, who was building Hadrian's Wall. So many of these monuments here actually record the military units who built sections of Hadrian's Wall. And here you've got 4 right in front of us from a legion called 20 Valeria Victrix.
Oh, the famous Valeria Victrix.
Absolutely, yeah. The boar, which is a symbol of Valeria Victrix. So you would have vexillations, regiments coming up to the wall to build sections, cycling through all the time, right there in front of you, their record.
And they're all carving the boar to let people know it was them. Unit pride.
Absolutely right, yeah. And here you have an example of a specific individual who served with 20 Valeria Victrix on Hadrian's Wall, right there. So this is the tombstone of Cornelius Victor, who was a Pannonian, so he was from the Danube frontier. He was the son of Saturninus. Now, Saturninus in the Roman period is a North African name. So his family were from North Africa. And we can even see his rank, and he's a very senior officer. He's the primus pilus of 20 Valeria Victrix, the most senior centurion in the whole legion. And there's his tombstone from Hadrian's Wall.
You can imagine a really grizzled veteran, 55 years old, still in the army. What a legend.
And still serving probably at the point that he died.
So he's come all the way from the Danubian provinces.
Yep.
Is that still the case later on in the empire, or are they using British troops to man these walls?
Well, towards the end of the Roman occupation in Britain, a change has taken place, because by then you've got field army troops who in Britain are based further south, and then you've got troops manning the walls, the limitani, who are effectively gendarmes, and those, the limitani, have probably been recruited locally.
So over the centuries, the troops here on the wall no longer came here from far across the empire. But even in the early days, close to Hadrian's time, local customs and beliefs had a strong influence on soldiers from distant lands who adopted British deities.
What have we got here? Well, this is a very important religious dedication, and we can tell firstly who it's been set up by. So it's been set up by the prefect of the first cohort of Batavians. So the prefect is the commanding officer. The first cohort of Batavians is an auxiliary foot unit who are based at Crawborough, and the Batavians themselves are from the Rhine Delta. They're Belgians, okay? So we know who set it up. But the interesting thing is that the deity it references is a local British deity called Coventina. So here we can see cultural transfer taking place. A unit of Belgian soldiers based in Roman Britain on Hadrian's Wall for so long that they start worshipping a local goddess.
And that wasn't a threat to the Roman Empire?
I think, actually, if you lived in the Roman world anywhere across the vast empire, if you did two things, you paid your taxes and you tipped your hat to the imperial cult, so you acknowledged that the emperor is a god, then you could do whatever you wanted to. They were very relaxed about who you worshipped, providing you acknowledged the emperor was a god.
But eventually, the world of the god emperors like Hadrian came to an end. The wall that he commanded nearly 300 years earlier no longer took orders from Rome. Around 410 AD, Britannia lost the control and protection of the empire. What happened to the great edifices built here? Back at Birdoswald, there's fascinating evidence of how things changed in this once mighty fortress as Rome's northern grip loosened.
Here we have one of the most important sequences along Hadrian's Wall for understanding the end of Roman Britain. We're at the granaries here at Birdoswald. So every Roman fort has two granaries, and those granaries are meant to feed the garrison and hold enough supplies for a whole year. At the end of the Roman period, though, there's a massive change here. So in the 370s, 380s AD, this granary that we're standing in front of here, they stopped using it as a warehouse. This is no longer a storage building, but actually a hall. Like a village hall, if you will, but someplace where people gather. But that's not the end of the story, because after this building has stopped being used, they then convert the northern granary into another one of these halls, except the stone is collapsed, so they're rebuilding it in timber, with timber framing. And then there's a third building, which they then build, which looks much more like a feast hall from Beowulf. And that's what these wooden posts are. And so we're going from something that looks like a Roman fort to something more like what we think of as an Anglo-Saxon settlement.
Wow, so you're seeing that transition. It feels like a kind of bureaucratic, very military setup with the warehouse and the grain to a place where people are partying and gathering. So it feels more informal.
Yes, absolutely. And under the traditional Roman method, the commanding officer would host dinner parties in his rather nice house. By the end of the Roman period, it looks like the commanding officer and whoever's in charge is hosting parties in the hall.
Things are getting a bit looser.
We're very far from the capital of the Roman Empire at the end of the Roman period. And the imperial capital isn't necessarily paying as much attention to this part of the empire. There are problems closer to home. So the local commanding officers, they probably have to do whatever they can to maintain their authority, to maintain not only their position, but the discipline of the garrison. And if they're not getting reinforcements from Rome, if they're not getting orders from the emperor or his generals, then they're doing what they think they need to do to continue on.
It's almost like these officers are going from kind of middle management and a huge imperial organized structure to sort of big warlords.
Exactly that. And that's exactly the term we use when we talk about that late Roman to early medieval transition in Britain, that the garrisons of Hadrian's Wall are morphing into these localized war bands.
The days of the wall as a line marking the edge of empire were gone. Hadrian's visit to Britannia in 122 AD was a very distant memory, as one of the high watermarks of the Roman world. But as the wall crumbled and its stones were reused in new buildings by a new order, its memory did linger on.
Rob, I know there's lots of walls in the world, but there's something about this wall that seems to have exercised a huge influence on artists, on writers. This idea that you can block off an entire island from what lies beyond.
Yeah, it's something we call a cultural afterlife, in the sense that it's had its glory days under the Roman Empire, but the wall is never really forgotten. We have medieval maps that mark the line of the wall. We have writers talking about it through the ages. The wall is almost a character in its own right in a lot of these books. It marks a a transition place from civilization to barbarism, or normality to weirdness in bizarro world.
Do you get any sense of that in ancient writers?
Yeah, there's this fantastic passage in Procopius, who's writing in the mid-6th century in Byzantium, in which he talks about it as separating the north and the south. And to the north of the wall, nothing can live. It's the land of the dead. But to the south of the wall, it's a moderate climate, and it's full of abundance and growth. So in Procopius's writings, we see the wall as a boundary into the other world.
And another story in which the wall features prominently as that dividing line between light and darkness feels like the Eagle of the Ninth.
Yeah, a great story where, yeah, crossing the wall is the start and the end of the journey.
And of course, Game of Thrones features a gigantic ice-bound wall protecting the civilized lands to the south from a world of otherness to the north, peopled by the wildlings and terrifying White Walkers.
We've got to talk Game of Thrones. It's got the big old wall. That's Hadrian's Wall, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the author of Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin, is on record saying that the first bit of Game of Thrones that comes together is when he did a visit to Housesteads in the early 1980s. And he looked across from the north ramparts and just kind of imagined what it must have been like in ancient times to be standing there looking into the savage lands, as it were.
Would the Romans have recognized our modern romanticized image of that as a wall, of a kind of absolute delineation, a barrier?
I think it depends on which Romans you talk to. If you were to talk to the soldiers, their wives, their children, the local farmers living here, I think they would probably laugh at us and say, don't be silly, that's too simple. But if you were to talk to a senator in Rome, or someone working at the local baths in Rome, they might absolutely think that. It's not that different from what we have today, that people who live very far removed from the borders have a certain image of what happens at borders, whereas the people that live next to the borders have a much more realistic sense of what happens on either side.
And indeed, if they live here, they will be familiar with the humanity of the people that live on the far side of the wall as well.
Exactly.
Whereas to people further removed, if you're down in Londinium or even Rome or North Africa, you must think that what lies beyond that wall is just darkness.
Yeah, and if we think back to Game of Thrones and your cousin Jon Snow, when he first talks about the wall, and he's first approaching the wall, it's something foreign, it's very alien, but during the course of his time there, he's going to the north of it. He's meeting the wildlings and the people on the other side and realizing they're not quite so different. And so there's always that lesson that when you get close, these borders aren't absolute.
Thank you for not saying you know nothing, Dan Snow. We got through a whole day.
Coming into the real wall, rather than the one of our imaginations, is a thought-provoking experience. For nearly 300 years, this was a potent symbol of what Rome could do and what it meant to be part of the Roman Empire.
It's so fascinating that perhaps it's here, on the very edge of the Roman Empire, its northern extremity, that we can best understand what made that empire so mighty. The sheer scale of the remains here, the richness, the quantity from coast to coast, means we get an unrivaled insight into what made that empire tick. The massive application of military force, the monumental building and engineering projects, and the methodical repetition of the systems that underpin that empire, and seen it conquer great swathes of territory and hold on to them. And it's all here, far from Rome, in the hills of northern England.